Hello and welcome to this video in which I'll be showing you how I painted these 15mm Battlefront Indians. I'm going to be using these either in Malaya or Italy, but these are the basic steps I took to get them on the table. So first up it was basing. You basically have to clean up the figures using a sharp knife just to get any extra bits of flash and things off, and then I stick them on 15mm diameter MDF bases. I wanted these individually based because I want to use them in I Ain't Been Shot Mum or Chain of Command, which uses individual based figures. The next up is to make the base workable by using Pollyfilla and filling in the gaps around the actual MDF base and the figure itself, so you're disguising that little nub that the figure is standing on. This I use a flat-headed screwdriver and just slowly work your way around each figure. It's the most boring part of the entire process. But once that's done, I start to work on the base itself. Here I'm using PVA that I've slightly watered down and just brushing that onto the base, dipping the figure in sand, and then that gives you a bit of a nice texture to work with for your base when it comes to painting it. And speaking of painting, I use Vallejo's Intermediate Green in the first instance. This goes on with a big brush. You don't have to really be neat at this point because we're going to neaten everything up later on anyway. And just make sure that all the MDF and all the sand is covered, but obviously make sure the sand is dry. Leave it overnight. Once that is dry, the paint, go back with Vallejo Flat Earth that's been watered down, and then just splash that all over the figures as well. It'll look a bit brown at this point, but once it dries you start to see that green through, and it really knocks down the brightness of that intermediate green anyway. And then finally for the base we just dry brush some yellow over the top. This is just an intermediate yellow. It's a very cheap artist paint that I've got that I use a massive tub of it, so I'll never run out of it, I don't think. And I just work my way through dry brushing all the way across the bases. Again, don't be too neat here because you don't really need to be. And then we'll go back with Vallejo's Khaki Grey. This is for the uniforms. I wanted the uniforms to be slightly sun bleached or even almost summer dress, because if you look at the photos from Italy and Malaya, this is the kind of gear that the guys are wearing. So I didn't want it to be British uniform, which is slightly darker than stone grey. Sorry, English uniform by Vallejo. It's slightly darker than the stone grey. We'll get that nice khaki look to it anyway later. And then we go back, and another long and pretty boring job is painting the backpacks, the straps, the turbans, the gaiters, and this is all done in khaki itself. So I just work my way through all of these very slowly. Try to be as neat as you can. This may be again slightly off colour really, but it works for me, and it's a 3-foot rule, and you also want a little bit of contrast with that uniform just so these bits stand out. Then it's the boots. I'll just do this, get them out of the way, and then they're done, because I don't really like painting boots for some reason. But this is Vallejo's black brown, German camo black brown. Just work your way through these. Be as neat as you can, because you don't want any of this stuff getting onto the base that you've already painted. And then we're moving on to the rifles and any wood that you can see through, so like entrenching tool handles, but this is mostly for the rifle butts themselves. Again, be as neat as you can here over the top of that uniform. Just make sure you cover all of the rifles, because that is going to be pretty noticeable when these things are finished. But it's quite an easy job, just using a smallish brush, working your way through. And the next step is the skin. So I use Vallejo's Flat Earth for the Indians. I would figure that they're probably quite dark skinned, being in either Italy or in Malaya because of the sun, so this is quite a nice colour for this. And then we start to finish off the rifles themselves, so this is just using gun metal on the bayonets, and also on any of the metal exposed parts that you can see, like magazines, or even all of the not Lewis guns, sorry, the Bren guns that you can see just down on the right hand side there. But again, be quite neat as you can on this, and just make sure you don't get paint all over the rest of the rifle itself. Just be very precise. And then I will go back and go and do the beards as well. You don't have to do this, but this is just black. I just go in, it just makes them stand out a little bit, because I find the darker skin is quite hard to actually highlight later on, so I just want a slight contrast on there. And then we're on to the final bits of these figures. It's a wash in Agrax Earthshade. This is Games Workshop's brownish wash. Literally daub this all over using a reasonably big brush. Very easy job. This brings everything together and just dulls all those colours down. And then finally we're on to the bases. So I'll use PVA glue here, undiluted. Get this all over these bases. This is a bit of a quick technique that I kind of came up with. I basically get a load of PVA glue, a big stack of figures, put blobs of PVA glue onto those bases, and then do as I'm doing here, which is basically sprinkle the static grass over the top of them. If you have a static grass applicator, you could use that here, but I don't bother. I find that if you just blow on these while they're still slightly wet, the grass itself stands up anyway. It's not a particularly difficult issue. And then once you've done that, just take each of the figures out, knock off as much of the grass as you can in the first instance, and then you can just pour that grass away. And there you are. That's them done, ready to fight the Germans or the Japanese, whichever you choose. These comply to my 3-foot rule. They look good from 3 foot away. They're 15mm, so you don't need to do tons of any detailing on these, but you can if you want. This is how to get them on the table quickly. Well, thank you for watching this video. If you have enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and do please check out my Patreon page.